Welcome to Topics. My guest this evening is Sonia Rollins, who's the sales manager at Exit Realty. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, Phil.
Real estate is going to be one of the many topics we're going to discuss. We also want to mention that Sonia brings quite a municipal resume to us this evening. She's the only woman, the only person in the history of the town to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, chairman of the Board of Selectmen, director of the Burlington Area Chamber of Commerce for 10 years, yes. Chairman of the Town Center Overlay Committee, yes. Amongst a variety of other things. Too numerous to mention.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a ride.
Been a ride.
Yeah.
Been a ride. And many more rides to take.
And there are still rides to
right.
take. This is true.
So let's start with real estate. That's
yes.
your profession.
It is.
The current conditions are rising interest rate environment, Burlington gentrification, sales, prices up, down. Let's start with the median price of a house in Burlington is $660.
Yes.
What are you seeing in terms of demand at this point with the Fed raising the rates over the last 6 months, almost with 500 points?
Yeah. I mean, the rates have certainly affected the marketplace, mm-hmm. right? The Burlington community has been very fortunate in that supply and demand has always played a role in Burlington's real estate. And then, of course, location of Burlington has played that role too. So while other communities have seen somewhat of a drop, Burlington has seen a marginal slowdown in market time, meaning it takes a little bit longer to get some houses sold, but we have not seen a dramatic drop in prices per mm-hmm. se, Phil, right? So even though the median price might be $660, it's difficult to get a house at $660 that doesn't need some significant work to it, mm-hmm. you know? So I keep telling people that the inventory under $1 million is still very much a demand issue. There's still a low inventory there. So homes that are going on the market under $1 million, their market time is still really pretty quick. Mm-hmm. It's the new constructions, which are over $1.5 million at this point, mm-hmm. That have started to see a slowdown. And I think that's really just indicative of, you know, there was a little bit of a consumer confidence issue with right. the interest rates continuing to rise.
And it's knocking the stretch buyer out. The 200 or 300 extra exactly. points in the mortgage would make a big difference.
I mean, I think it's going to adjust itself, quite frankly. I don't mm-hmm. think Burlington's. I don't think the sky is falling. I really mm-hmm. don't. I think that the need is still always there. I think that some of these houses will go under agreement, albeit market. We all got fat and happy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that it was just starting to, you'd put something on, it would sell. You'd put something on, it would sell. There'd be multiple bids. Mm-hmm. People are panicking about the interest rates, but I keep trying to remind people, remember that a year ago you were willing to pay $150,000 over the asking price. Right. So when you think of it that way, you're now really at a better predicament because you can actually breathe. You can actually think about if you like the house, and you don't have to go into a massive bidding war over every property you see. You know, you're looking at more of a value that is something you're purchasing a house at its true value, and then, you know, statistically people refinance. So even if you buy into a rate that's a little bit harder than it was 2 years ago, you know, you can have faith that within a few years you'll be able to buy it down.
Now, what about financing? If we harken back to 2008 when the banks all failed because
yes.
of, excuse me, that funky kind of financing where they were yes. doing a first mortgage with a second mortgage on top, adjustable. Are we seeing that, or have the banks returned to a more normalized lending process?
I think you're seeing that the banks are more normalized. I don't think that they're going to go all the way back to those no-doc loans where you could just stated income. Remember that?
Right.
Like you could say whatever you made, and then as long as your credit report didn't show anything dramatic, they gave you the loan. That is not happening. Underwriting is still very much, you know, they're very much doing their homework on you. I think you're going to see adjustables come back. You know, I think they already are coming back, the 7/1 ARMs, the 5/1 ARMs. Mm-hmm. But you do have to qualify still as if it was going out a 30-year at its full rate. You know, mm-hmm. So while the adjustables have come back, I don't think underwriting has turned into what it was in 2008.
Now let's talk about gentrification. My position has been that, or my opinion,
yes.
has been that everything pre-1970 that isn't substantially improved is going to be a knockdown over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Is that happening? If it is happening, what is the price point that a resident can look at in terms of making a decision as to whether to sell it as a knockdown or try and get a higher price, et cetera? Where's the metrics there?
So if you had asked me this question last year, I would tell you that knockdowns were going all the way up to 650. So you were paying, builders were paying 650 on a knockdown, and then they were, paying. Obviously, the lumber was up, the subcontractors were up.
Huge,
So
right.
hence why you see the new construction prices at $1.6 million, $1.7 million, $1.8 million, right? Because they have to make the money back on that. If you ask me now, I think the knockdown number is probably, south of 600. It's less than 600. It's more like the mid 500s, give or take, depending on where it is and the size of the lot. Is everything before 1970 a knockdown? It really, here's the dilemma, and it sounds coy, but this is the truth. I think the dilemma is, do we have enough housing stock for people who are looking to leave single-family housing or leave the housing environment that they're in and still be able to stay in Burlington? For people who have lived in Burlington all their lives and they've lived in a ranch, for example, that they bought for $30,000, and everybody says to them, now it's worth $650, don't you want to sell, or $700? It's a great answer, but where are they going to go, right? And so the dilemma becomes, in my opinion, they stay in their house too long. They don't have the money to fix it up. It gets tired. Today's consumer doesn't want to do work, for better or for worse. They're buyers that are looking to buy something that's ready. And I think it's actually unfortunate, because it takes out that first-time home buyer ability to buy a ranch and come into a good price point. So the ranches that are kept up are actually beautiful, because it meets a multitude of demographics. It meets those looking to downsize from a larger home to a smaller. It meets the demographic of people looking to come into the community with a smaller home and not necessarily going in, to the larger colonials.
And the elderly who wants to stay on one floor.
And the elderly who want to stay on one floor.
So let's talk about the options. We've put on a ton, the housing crisis. We've put a ton of rentals on.
Yes.
All those units up on Northwest Park,
Yes.
the Davis, all of these different units.
Yes.
None of them seem to be condos, except we'll talk about the town center.
Yes.
Is this the way to go? I mean, for instance, a $100 million project up in Northwest Park, and I understand they don't want to sell them out before a year because of the capital gains tax versus ordinary income.
Correct.
But who can afford to move move into a two-bedroom apartment that's $2,500 or $2,800? How do we fix that gap on the low end with either one-bedroom condos or something in that order?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, there are people who don't have down payments, for example, but on a monthly income ability, they can afford $2,800, $3,200 a month, or they want to stay in the area, they have a second home somewhere else, they sell their single family, they go to that. You are 100% right that we need more condos, in my opinion. I don't think rentals are a bad thing. I think there are a lot of people who don't choose home ownership. They want to live, either they work in this area and they're here for a while, they're testing the area, or they just don't want home ownership. There are those people, right?
Well, let's look at our offspring, for instance, or the
Yes.
community offspring.
Yes.
You put up $100 million worth of rentals, and it appreciates 6% a year. That's $6 million that goes into the developer's pocket.
Yes.
If we put up $100 million worth of one-bedroom condos, that's 6% annualized, or $6 million that's going into the
Town.
and
And
the owners.
for the owners,
And for the
correct.
owners.
100%. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying there is actually room for both of those. There is room. When we talk housing stock, I think there's something to be said for saying there is room to allow for every. Burlington's been very unique because we were a single family community for so long, Phil. So even
Ranches and capes.
exactly, and then the splits came in, right? And then here's what happens. The entrance of condos came in, and it was with a little bit of resistance, right? Because it felt like that's not the type of housing stock we wanted. But the truth is, every community needs every type of housing stock, because then it allows the residential base to be able to manage themselves and stay within their community.
Up and
Our
down, sideways,
offspring
et cetera.
can't do that, None of my children could just turn around and buy a home in Burlington today. It will take them a number of years to get to that point.
And that's the problem with a rental at $2,800. They're captured, they're prisoners. Who's going to put up with, $50,000 down payment?
So it's that kind of a thing. The housing stock is important. A mixture of those one bedrooms, the two bedrooms, a mixture what we call garden style homes and direct entry condos. They're needed. They're actually needed.
We'll swing back to housing in a
Yeah.
second on town overlay, but let's talk about
Yes.
the area chamber of commerce.
Yes.
Obviously the pandemic impacted you folks.
Yes.
You're back up and running. You just had the gala. Is everything in place? Is membership increasing? What are some of the programs you're running in terms of charitable programs, et
Yeah,
cetera?
I could talk about the chamber all day. It really is a unique group of people because it is Burlington in its essence, and then some, it's Burlington area because there are some businesses in there that come in from the outside, from around the Burlington area.
Who have a marketplace.
Who have a marketplace in Burlington, or at least are close enough that they do a lot within the community or around the community. Rick Parker is the president. We have Debbie Patterson there as an administrative assistant. The amount of work that comes out of that office, you would think there's, look at BCAT, right? It's the same kind of thing where it's a small base of people who do a lot of great work together. So we were affected by the pandemic. We were very fortunate to get some funding from the state in order to help hold our staff in place for a little bit, but at one point had to furlough them.
Yeah, that
So,
was PEP program.
yeah, it was
right.
a PEP, right? And then we also got some funding thanks to State Rep Ken Gordon. He got us some money so that we could help some of our members as well, give them free memberships and allow them the opportunity to be able to still do some work together within the chamber. So the chamber does a lot of, the uniqueness of it is it's one-person businesses all the way up to large corporations and developers and landowners. We do a lot with networking for some of the smaller businesses, so morning and evening networking, where you talk about business and doing business and meeting those that you need to meet. But then the larger companies have a lot of great benefits from the chamber because they're able to talk government relations, and that's what's important to those companies that size is talking about what's happening in the community and how that affects them, whether that be with their taxes or whether that be with what kind of community outreach they want to do. The chamber becomes the conduit for that. The charitable foundation is another portion of the chamber. And we've been really fortunate because we have a dozen or so nonprofits that are part of the chamber, and 8 of them have been recipients of the Black Tie Gala. So Herb Chambers Companies has been great to us. This year was our 5th one, not 5th annual because there was a little bit of a COVID run, right? It was really the 5th annual, right?
Dirty Dancing wasn't part of that, right?
Right, exactly. So, but Herb Chambers every time came out as the premier sponsor. And when I sent out the email to him this year, they answered us like that, which is so beautiful because we hadn't reached out in 3 years. And we came back to say we're going to do the Black Tie Gala. And over the course of 5 years, we've done a little better than $150,000. So we're pretty proud of that. We divided out between the nonprofits, and now more than ever, those charities, matter. They're helping people who needed it. So we're very lucky because what it does is it brings a lot of the business community in with the residential base, and it was like, a do-good together, dressed up nice, dressed up
Let's
well.
shift gears again and
Yes.
talk about, you were on the board for a long period of time
I
when we
was.
had water problems. We continue to have water problems. So 2 questions I have as a former board member.
Yes.
We've got a headlong rush into laboratory space as well as a headlong rush into liquor licenses.
Yes.
Now, restaurants have a terrible track record for staying open. I think they have 50%.
It is a hard business.
Right, hard business, 50% failure rate at least. We also did this previously in the hotel business back 20 years ago when we added so many hotel rooms.
Yes.
We're suffering that now because hotel revenue is down 50%. Do you think this is sustainable? First of all, on the restaurant side, if we have a downturn here, are we going to have a massacre?
So I think that during the COVID years, I guess we'll call it, right?
Well, we can discount
we
that
can
because
discount
nobody
that, right?
did
But you
well.
really saw the challenge of restaurants and what they did for a community and what they needed to survive. I think COVID taught us a lot in that way, right? Like if everything shuts down, what's going to happen to some of the things that rely on our daytime population? Because let's call it, right? That's where our success comes in, is the daytime population. We have a
Well,
great...
that concerns me as well. Because of COVID, we have a lot of work from homes now.
Yes.
So you see these parking lots are empty.
Yes.
But by the same token, you know, I went down the mall to Karma, I think, the other night. The place was hopping, bagging.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to say to you is it's hard to say really because the restaurant's problems now, I don't think is the people coming in. I think it's the manpower. I think we're having trouble, finding people. The chamber deals with it all the time. We hear it from the restaurateurs. They are struggling to find enough help in order to meet the demand of what's going on. And while we can't really call COVID, we can't make a decision based on what we saw from COVID. What we know from COVID is that people were pent up for a while and they're ready to come back out, and they're coming out with a vengeance now. So now they're out and about and the restaurants are doing well. Will it survive? I'd like to believe that to be the case just because of what's going on around us and the build out of what's going on around us, not just in Burlington, but in the surrounding communities. We're like that hub in the corner, in the middle, that kind of services all of these other communities. As long as the manpower stays, I think we're going to be okay. Do you keep adding to it? I don't know the answer to that, Phil. I mean, I feel like there is a point where everybody says, wow, are we going to really open another steakhouse, for example? And then the other steakhouse opens and everybody is still meeting the demand.
5 years ago, I said this is never going to work. And of course, I've been proved wrong every year since.
But that's why I think it's so interesting. I think it's very hard for us to say, because what would I like to see? I'd like to see a few more mom and pop, smaller type restaurants be able to survive. And in order to do that, you need the residential base to support those as well as the larger ones, like to find that middle happy ground. So I think as it stands now, I think where, the restaurants are doing well. And I think they'll be able to sustain. I do, based on what's going on around us.
Well, they're a huge component of the local options tax, which we'll talk about in a second. But since you mentioned it, the small mom and pop, let's swing over to the Town Center Overlay District. You were chairman of that committee.
I was.
A portion of that has been enormously successful across from Skilton Lane. Those condos went in, sold out, beautiful.
Yes.
Behind the CVS, those condos again,
Yes.
Decent price points. Those were very successful.
Yes.
However, main component of the town overlay was somehow revitalizing the town center. Now, it's hard to do from a financial standpoint where you're looking at buildings that have been there for 40 or 50 years, probably no encumbrance on them, decent rents coming in. So how do you make a $50, $75 million investment down there and get the kind of revenue necessary to sustain that? Can you do it with mom and pop restaurants and things of that sort?
You can, but it's a patience factor. So when we were doing the town center overlay, we talked about a changeover in the town center could take upwards of 15 to 20 years to happen. Sure. Because first of all, because you don't own it all, right? It's 130. The overlay is 130 acres. It starts somewhere right around the high school, and it takes you all the way up to the medical building.
Well, the Duffy Properties was a perfect example of taking advantage of that. However, it took them 4 years and they're still not filled.
Yeah, but the Duffy Properties, with all due respect, the problem happened in that it wasn't a mixed use. It didn't fill the space the way that it was originally. The intent of the town center was to be able to have housing and commercial together, melded together. Now it is mixed use.
Up,
correct.
Residential over.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is mixed use because it's on two parcels and it's there.
Right.
But it was a little bit of a different build out. They built it out and they did a good job building it out. But I think
and
a lot of
condos did go. It took a while, but they did go.
They did, yeah. Mm-hmm. But those are rentals.
Oh, they are rentals. Okay.
Yeah, so those took a little longer.
Well, maybe in the capital gains category, we can see them on the market soon. Who knows?
Yeah, but the condos speak in volume to what we were just talking about a little while ago, because I very vividly remember when we were presenting this to town meeting, and those were 5 single-family home lots, and everybody said, "Who's going to live on Cambridge Street?"
Right.
Do you remember that whole thing?
Yeah. Well,
and
point.
And it was they were $360,000, I think, at the time.
Very affordable.
Very
affordable,
affordable, right? And
Yeah.
everybody said no one's going to do it, and they sold out like that. And they sold out like that because there's a need for that.
Right.
And when you look at that and you build out town centers, what people look at is they see that housing needs to put itself near conveniences, local conveniences. So, you know, Paula Salvucci's running a beautiful coffee shop down there, and the housing helps her, you know, just like she helps them. It's a perfect melding. So you have True North.
That's True North, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
True North.
Yeah, the
and
bagel place too, I think.
The bagel
although
place
the
is
poor kid, you know, he opened it up, and 2 weeks later, you know, the pandemic came.
right,
you know, yeah.
exactly. But you have all
Poor
of these,
kid,
yeah.
relative to old Phil. You know.
And old Sonia.
Okay.
but I do really think that that's what happens is you have these, you know, these two things have to meld together. So could a mom and pop make it there? They could. It's hard for people to hear this, but you need condos in order for people to do that. You need a housing stock that where people will walk around. It wasn't by chance, and Tony was here at the time when he did the, he was our planning director
Tony
at the
Fields,
time,
yeah,
Tony
yeah,
Fields.
sure.
And it was a calculation. There's a number that you know in order to get enough housing, in order to have enough restaurants, in order to have enough convenience stores. There's an actual calculation with that.
Yeah.
That was a lot of hours in a room. But I do think it's sustainable. I think there's a patience factor. And I think
Well, we have an odd flavor down there in terms of
Yes.
little retail strip along with the bank and True North, but in behind there is a confluence of contractors and various necessary components to a
Yes.
community: plumbers, electricians, trucking,
100%.
etc. So it's kind of a difficult melding of those two uses.
It is and it isn't. I think the hardest part for Burlington, in my opinion, is that it's always looked like that, right? And it's been very hard for people to see that this could transform. They kept saying to me then, you know, come on, wake up, it's Cambridge Street. And my answer to them always was, go to any town center. It's the main roadway. It's just that was there. Winchester Center, it was all built up already. It's an older center, you know. Lexington built out some of it. Arlington Center, same thing. Woburn has done an unbelievable job with their redevelopment. You know, so when you look at that,
lot of mom and pops.
lot of mom and pops. So when you look at that, there's a patience factor. There's a work in progress. You're not wrong. Some of those buildings are in good shape, and you know we've spoken to the property owners down there, and their stance is, if they were to tear that down and rebuild it, the rent would become astronomical for those people. So they wait it out, and I get that.
Well, that's a case of the over and under, though, too. You could enhance that if you gave 1 or 2 extra stories on the particular lot, zero lot lines, things of that
Exactly,
sort.
which is why the overlays build out was ideal, honestly. But it's hard for me to hear when people say it's a failure. It's certainly not a failure. There are things going on.
No,
However,
there's components of it that have been a smashing success.
absolutely. And what needs to happen, if it were up to me, if I had a wand, right, I would take over Cambridge Street, quite frankly. I would take it, you know, the state was very willing to give it away. I would have taken that because then you have control over the roadway. Many communities did it. They took it over in their town center, and that way they could decide what kind of sidewalks, what kind of things. The state would bring it up to speed for you, and then they would hand it over. That's one component, the walkability factor, and then being able to build out. If you and I have been here for a long time. We remember what used to be standing at the top of CVS, and I remember very vividly. And Murray Hills built CVS prior to the town center overlay being passed, but agreed in the vision, and so built a CVS that had a colonial feel to it, and it also agreed to put an ornamental light at the top of Skilton Lane. Any of us who've been here long enough remember there used to be no light at Skilton Lane.
Well, plus it took us 2 years for us to accept the gift that he offered of giving Skilton Lane to us.
Yeah, and then, and if you remember, you had to hit the gas just right. So you could get over that bump
God
to get out
forbid
on
if you were driving a standard,
Right,
you know, you
forget
burn
it.
the clutch out.
Exactly, and up where CVS was old. There was an old Donuts and More, I think it was called, at the bottom. So if you take a snapshot of Cambridge Street, only 20, not even 10, 12 years ago, and you take today's snapshot, you'll say the town is absolutely
Particularly the bank at that intersection.
100%.
Now, I was just going to, had a question for you on that, but let's go to, Burlington's always made a headlong rush into various types of businesses.
Yes.
Hotels, restaurants, printed circuit board manufacturers, computer manufacturers. Those two things ultimately realized poisoned water, or ultimately became poisoned water as a result of the various chemicals they were using. And this was from the industrialization too, way back in the 50s when high voltage went in, RCA went in, etc. Now, to my point here in a very long-winded fashion, we've gone through Wuhan, and there has been a Senate report that said that Wuhan was a release of an airborne pathogen, a virus. Now we're bringing in all kinds of, and chasing, as are other related communities, chasing the idea of lab space. Are you confident that this is going to be properly regulated so we don't have that type of a thing that we've had in the past or that has happened in the recent future?
So I am confident that the regulations will be in place in order to do it, because I do think that where Burlington has always stayed ahead of the curve is that we know what's in demand for certain things. Now, there's always an element of risk. There's risk factor in everything people do, but I do feel confident that the regulations will watch it, because without the lab space, there are certain businesses, and we now know Class A office space is not in demand.
See what the leases roll off in the next 2 years.
Exactly. So when you start seeing that Class A office space is not in demand, you have to be proactive for that, right? And so that's really, the confidence level is there.
Okay, we covered half of the topics I had planned. We've only got 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Let's put your Ways and Means hat on.
Okay.
What is your subcommittee this year?
I have DPW and the Recreation Department.
Oh, great. How'd they stick you with that?
Near and dear to my heart. I'm a DPW girl, but I like Rec too, but I am a DPW
Bring us through
girl.
the process. Have the guidelines been set by the financial management team and presented to the Ways and Means at this point?
We have not gotten the presentation yet. I am assuming, based on my knowledge of when it happened, that they've had those initial discussions about the guidelines, the upper management level, but we will hear about that soon. So Ways and Means will start doing their meeting. As you know, the budget process will start. We're into February, so it will start soon. We'll be looking at a guideline, adopting a guideline. And the process, for those who don't know it, is that it becomes...
Take us through what happens across the committee as this is presented to them.
So I think when people hear Burlington or any other community is like a large corporation, right? So the process comes in that we know there's a guideline on how much budgets will be able to increase. And then each department head brings in their first draft, their first round. And of the 15 members...
And that goes to their management first.
Goes to their management first, right. And their management does the initial sign-off on it. It then comes to Ways and Means and is subdivided amongst the 15 members. So each department has 2 members from Ways and Means as a subcommittee who take a look at it and start to go over it in great detail. We then present that budget to Ways and Means along with the department heads, and Ways and Means either votes favorably or unfavorably. We don't approve a budget. We just make a recommendation to town meeting, and obviously town meeting at the end of the day makes their final approval on that. So it's a process that takes it's the May town meeting that's the budget town meeting. So it's a process that now will take every week from now until May, where we all get to be
Good
together.
luck with that.
Yeah, where we all get to be together.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
The town meeting, sometime their attendance is dreadful. And it was even dreadful when they didn't have to show up. All they had to do was sit in front of a computer. Yes. And we still only got 85%. Yes. We have elections coming up in which several other precincts are not represented. It does not have a candidate for the precinct seat. Now, this is a community of 17,000 registered voters, yes. And we can't get 118 people. We can't fill the moderator can't fill his appointments. Is it time to take a look at changing town government? I've never been a proponent of it.
Tricky to ask that question with a minute left. Yeah.
Well, it gives you an out.
Yeah,
you can say yes or no.
I think it absolutely is time to at least look at that. Mm-hmm. I think that a town meeting, the body has done Burlington very well for a number of years, obviously for its entire time, but it would not hurt to look at the charter. I think that this is a community that really runs as a corporation, as a city. We are town, absolutely. We don't have to change that feel, but I think it's time to think about, are we getting enough involvement? And if not, do we have to see a different way to run the government?
We have disparate individual boards. We have the recreation, we have the Board of Health, we have the planning board, we have the library, et cetera. All disparate boards running independently. But does a concentration of power into, say, a town manager or a mayor with a city council restrict actually the availability of the people to the government?
We're out of time, but I'm going to say no. It does not.
Good. All right, we are out of time. I want to thank our guest today, Sonia Rollins.
Thank you
very
for having
much,
me,
Sonia.
Phil.
Good luck in your endeavors. You'll need it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you for joining us.